Okay, we're on the podcast with Angelo Poli, co-founder at MetPro, a metabolism genius, as I like to call him. How you doing, Angelo?
Hey, Trevor. Thank you guys for having me.
We've got a lot of great questions sent in from listeners about nutrition and the metabolism, weight loss, all kinds of stuff. I'm going to let Angie ask the first one here.
This question comes from Steven. He asks, I've been hearing a lot about this diet called the anabolic diet. Have you heard of it? Bodybuilders seem to use it because the diet is based on low calorie, dense foods that fill your stomach while keeping you in a calorie deficit. So it's mostly good, healthy food, but has a low emphasis on fat. And they find a lot of low calorie replacements for traditional foods. My question is this: could this type of diet be useful to long distance runners, especially those who are trying to lean up a bit for faster times? And then he kind of goes on to ask, can you talk about the differences between what happens to a runner's metabolism and a weightlifter's metabolism?
Okay, that's a great question. So, spoiler alert, the answer to every question is depends. That's the answer to every question when it starts with should I do this or that with my nutrition? It depends. So, I'm not intimately acquainted, but I am familiar with the basics. There's a lot of different strategies. The anabolic diet is one that's very bodybuilder focused, and it's based off of sound principles that I think when he was referring to calorie dense foods, I think perhaps what he meant was or water dense but filling foods that are low in calories, because that's what your bodybuilding diets typically revolve around. So foods that have a high water content or that are just generally lower in whatever macronutrient they're dominant in, protein, carbs, or fats, but are more satiating, are almost always go-tos. You hear bodybuilders eating brown rice, oatmeal, sweet potato. You hear them eating chicken, broccoli, asparagus. Some that prefer plant-based will do tofu, or they'll do, and of course, nuts and seeds. So there's the foods themselves are great. And there's nothing wrong with applying one of the principles that's going to trigger weight loss, which is contrast. And with most programs like that, you're going to have days where you eat more carbs and days where you eat less carbs. Uh, Typically, that is a little rougher on endurance athletes because there's no way to cheat it. So I like powerlifting, and I can just go in on the weekends and I can be cut corners and be a power lifter and just train a few hours a week, just for recreation purposes. If you're an endurance athlete, there's no cheating it. You have to put in the hours, which means you're probably going to need more consistent fuel Monday through Friday and the weekends. In fact, some days maybe a little more if you're doing long runs. But that extreme variation that sometimes is a hallmark of kind of a bodybuilding prep meal plan usually isn't our first go-to. That said, there's nothing wrong with cutting calories. There's nothing wrong with having lower carb days, but you want to do it through the lens of I'm a runner and I need to fuel for my running. So I would do it gradually. What our coaches do is they evaluate, okay, what are your long running days? What are your short running days? And sometimes what they'll do is they'll have you scale back a little bit on whatever macronutrient you need the least that day. And the question is, when do you cut? So you don't want to ramp up and say, oh, well, my race is almost here. If I could just be 2 pounds lighter, it's not worth it. You're not going to improve your time. So go in 2 pounds heavier, fueled. Then well before your next race, that's when you want to time your cutting cycle to where when you're a little bit lower on your training volume, we get your weight down, whatever it is, 5 pounds, 10 pounds or more, and then ramp up your fuel as you're going into your heavy training season and then your event.
Yeah, I've experienced that working with Coach Natalie, who I've been working with for a couple of years. And right now we're in a down adjust phase. So a little bit lower on some of the macronutrients because I'm not doing heavy mileage right now. And then we're planning to up adjust as I get closer to my goal races for this fall so that I can go in feeling strong and well fueled. So it works really well.
See? That's fantastic. And just so a little nerdy kind of sciencey stuff, peek behind the curtain. So what our coaches are looking for is we're looking at the scientific tools. Okay, so what are the primary tools? If somebody says, I want to perform better, but I also want to be lighter, we know that in some way, shape, or form, we're going to have to introduce a calorie restriction or manipulation, carbohydrate restriction or manipulation, look at meal frequency, carb timing, glycemic load, and then there's two other things that we can look at. We can look at micro periodization and macro periodization. Now, at MetPro, we use them all, just depending on the circumstance. The difference between micro and macro periodization is really its efficacy from a behavioral standpoint. So microperiodization would be on either like a 24-hour cycle or a weekly cycle. I'll have higher or lower intake phases. Macro periodization we refer to as, okay, on a month, 2 or 3 month cycle, I have periods of higher intake or lower intake. Both approaches can work, but we find that more often than not, adherence to microperiodization is a lot tougher for people, consistency, because it's hard enough. People say, oh, I got to prep my meals, I got to follow this meal plan, I have a strategy, to then have it change for these days of the week, and then you have a whole new meal plan that you have to prep for those days of the week. We find that it's a little tougher to do. I do have some of my clients implement that at times, but usually that's just for a short period of time where possible.
I've been on a 2, maybe 3 year up adjust cycle.
Well, somehow it's working for you, Trevor. Keep going.